In the seasons that followed, the world quieted its memory of Echo and Narcissus. But memory, like rivers, has a way of returning to the same valleys. And where memory flows, dreams begin to bloom. There was a traveler, a young woman, cloaked in linen and dust. Her name was Lyra. She had wandered far from her homeland not for glory or gold, but for silence. A silence the cities could not give her. A silence deeper than sleep. Lyra had lost her voice once. Not by curse, but by grief. Too many goodbyes had filled her with silence, and so she walked through the world not speaking, only listening. Listening to wind in reeds, to bees in lavender, to the quiet morning of clouds. She came to the weeping meadow at the turn of spring, when the daffodils were beginning to bloom. She did not know its name, nor its tale. But when she saw the flower fields glimmering in the sun like spilled gold, she paused. Something stirred in her chest, not a word, but a feeling. She set her pack down and walked barefoot among the blooms. And then, without meaning to, she whispered, "I wish I knew how to say goodbye." From somewhere behind her, a voice returned. "Goodbye." Lyra turned quickly. There was no one. But her heart didn't race. Instead, it slowed. The wind smelled faintly of rain. Her shoulders relaxed. The air around her pulsed with something old and watching. She stood still for a long while, then sat upon a mossy stone and closed her eyes. That night, she dreamed of a cave. In the dream, Lyra entered slowly, touching the walls with quiet reverence. The walls whispered, not in words, but in memories. Soft images. Faces long gone. A boy by a pool. A girl in shadow. A daffodil bending gently toward its own reflection. She awoke with tears on her cheeks and dew on her palms, as though she'd touched the flowers in her sleep. And from that day forward, Lyra returned to that meadow each year. She never stayed long. She never brought others. But she always left something behind, a carved stone, a ribbon, a feather, a melody hummed under her breath. And each time, as she turned to leave, the wind answered. Not in her words, but in her voice. And she would smile. Because she knew she had been heard, the world shifted slowly, like waves rolling onto a forgotten shore. Time in the mortal realm passed as it always did, marked by seasons, by generations, by stories that were told and retold until they no longer knew if they were truth or myth. But deep in the hills, where no roads led and no names lingered, the spirit of Echo endured. And Echo waited. She did not age. She did not grow. But her presence deepened, like a stone smoothed by centuries of river water. Her cave, once only shelter, became a sacred space for sound itself. A place where language softened, where hearts could empty, and where silence was always heard. Travelers came and went. Most did not stay. But sometimes, once in a while, someone would linger longer than the rest. Sit quietly by the rocks. Speak gently into the wind. And then, listen. Those were the ones she answered. They never knew who she was. They never saw her. But they always left changed. And far above them, on cloudy Mount Olympus, the gods were watching once again. Among the immortals, Hera remained most aware. Not because she feared Echo. That curse, she knew, had long ago done its work. But something lingered in the mountains. Some reverberation. Something that did not fade with time, and would not bend to silence. She began to hear her own words, spoken back to her, but softer, wiser. Not in cruelty. Not in defiance. But in memory. And Hera was not used to being remembered gently. One afternoon, when Olympus was quiet, she descended once more to the world below. Not in rage this time. Not in pursuit of Zeus. But in search of something she had not named, a feeling, half forgotten, that stirred in the corners of her being like the ghost of a song. She arrived at the meadow first. The daffodils greeted her without judgment. Their petals glowed golden under a muted sky. Hera walked among them slowly, her hand grazing their heads, her footsteps light as a sigh. Then she stood still. And she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go so far." A pause. Then from the hills, her own voice came back, "So far." Hera closed her eyes. The echo didn't accuse. It didn't mock. It simply repeated. And somehow, that hurt more than blame. She turned her face to the mountains. She did not climb them, not yet, but she looked toward the place where Echo had once stood, voice full of life, delaying a queen with words as playful as spring rain. Hera inhaled deeply. Then, with no audience and no fanfare, she whispered again, "I see you." And far away, hidden in the stillness of stone, Echo listened. Her heart, if she still had one, stirred faintly. Like a spark under ash. The voice had changed. Hera's voice. Older. Quieter. Less sharp. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was recognition. And that was something. Time passed differently in the divine realms. To mortals, it was years. Generations. To Echo, it was only moments, a handful of voices, a few stolen memories, a cluster of dreams passed through sleeping minds. And in that time, a new child was born. Not a god. Not a mortal. Something in between. A girl, named Thalia, daughter of a poet and a healer. She was raised in a coastal town where myths were spoken like prayers and songs were as sacred as bread. From a young age, she was drawn to places others avoided, quiet ruins, echoing caves, the edges of things. She heard voices no one else could. Not ghosts. Not madness. Just memory. When she spoke in the schoolyard, others listened too closely. Not because of what she said, but because of how it lingered. Her voice carried far, even when she whispered. And sometimes, when she was alone, the world answered back. Her parents thought it imagined. But they never discouraged it. They only watched, quietly, lovingly, as their daughter grew more attuned to what most had long forgotten. When she turned 16, Thalia began to dream of a cave. In the dreams, she walked barefoot through moss and stone, and heard her own voice echo softly around her. She would speak only one word, "Why?" And the cave would answer, each time with a different tone. Once with grief. Once with laughter. Once with something that sounded like understanding. She did not fear it. Instead, she followed it. One dusk, guided by instinct more than map, Thalia left home with a satchel of bread, a flask of sweet water, and a poem folded carefully in her pocket. She walked alone into the mountains. Not to seek fame. Not to find herself. But to find the voice that had once answered her soul's deepest questions. It was spring when she found the meadow. Daffodils bloomed wildly, as if untouched by time. She sat among them and whispered, "I remember you." And from the cliffs, a faint voice answered, "You." The wind that swept through the daffodil field carried more than petals. It carried memory. It passed over Thalia's skin like a sigh, lifting strands of her dark hair as she sat perfectly still among the flowers. She did not call out again. She did not chase the echo. She simply listened. And in that silence, something stirred. It was not a voice exactly, but a warmth, a feeling that spread through the roots of the mountains, into the stones beneath her feet, and curled softly behind her heart like a flame trying to remember how to burn. Thalia closed her eyes. She breathed in. And breathed out. The wind answered. The mountains didn't speak in words, not anymore. They spoke in echoes, in rhythm, in patterns, a cadence that only hearts still enough could understand. The stories weren't gone. They were just quiet. Waiting. That night, Thalia slept in the shadow of a stone arch, wrapped in her shawl, her head on her satchel. The moon hung heavy and low, brushing the tips of the mountain peaks with silver. In her dreams, she was not alone. Echo came to her. Not in full form, not as a woman with skin and eyes, but as shimmer, voice, sensation. A presence that bent the world around it, softening sound, dimming light, allowing stillness to be the loudest song. Echo's presence moved gently around Thalia. Then, at last, she whispered. Not a mimicry. Not a return of someone else's voice. But her own. Just one word, remember. Thalia woke before dawn. The stars still clung faintly to the edges of the sky like frost before the melt. She rose slowly, without urgency, as though her body had long known this was the day it would begin to move deeper into something ancient. She walked toward the cave. It was barely marked, only a few overgrown stones, a shift in the shape of the hillside. But she felt it, the way the birds paused in their song as she passed, the way her shadow moved a little slower. She stepped inside. The cave was cool and dry, a space carved not by gods, not by mortals, but by time and silence. Each footstep echoed softly, then softer still. It didn't grow darker, it grew quieter. The deeper she went, the more the sound changed. Her breath, once clear and steady, became rounded. Her footsteps lost their edge. And then, nothing. Just the sound of her own being, pulsing quietly, alive. She reached the heart of the cave. And there, carved into the wall, were names. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Each etched with care, in different styles, from different times. Some were long worn away. Others glowed faintly, as though lit from within. At the very center was one word. Thalia stood before it and placed her hand against the stone. I've been listening, she said softly. The air did not return her words. Not immediately. But then, from every direction at once, her voice came back, not as an echo, but as a harmony. A swelling of layered whispers, not just of her, but of others. Voices. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. All saying, in different languages and tones. I've been listening. She stepped back, eyes wide but calm. The cave shimmered faintly. And then, behind her, a shape formed. Echo. Not quite spirit, not quite memory, something between. She looked the same as she always had in the old stories, young, wild-haired, cloaked in soft shadow. But her eyes had no judgment. Only longing. Thalia turned to her. You're still here, she said. Echo didn't answer with words. She simply extended her hand. Thalia took it. And the mountain exhaled. The next moments were not moments. They were not time, not space. Thalia's mind was no longer alone. She saw what Echo had seen. Felt what Echo had felt. The curse. The shame. The silence that had followed. She saw the pool where Narcissus had fallen. She saw Hera's furious eyes. She saw Zeus's disappearing figure through clouds. And she saw Echo, left behind in every story. Every telling. Always the echo, never the voice. But now, her voice had returned. Through Thalia. Through those who listened. And through those who would remember. When Thalia awoke, she was lying at the mouth of the cave, the morning sun warm on her face. The daffodils bent slightly in the breeze, as though bowing. She rose slowly, brushed dust from her palms, and looked back. She had already been written into it. And so, she descended the mountain. Not as a girl, not as a hero, but as a listener. A keeper of echoes. She returned to her village. She spoke to few, but the ones she spoke to listened as they never had before. And when they spoke, they heard themselves more clearly.